Welcome to You Got Moxie. I'm your host, Julie Ann Crommett. Welcome to our premiere episode of the podcast about the how of change making. Not the why or the what, but the how. Our first guest is Baratunde Thurston, award-winning host, producer, writer, and public speaker. He discusses pivotal moments in his career that led to a desire for change and a shift toward more creative pursuits. He really emphasizes the importance of starting small and focusing on what you have access to in the moment. He reminds us that change is constant and that we have the ability to shape our world through our actions and connections with others. Hi, welcome Baratunde. We're so excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Julie Ann Crommett, good to see you.
It's so good to see you. It's always a joy to be able to sit and chat with you. And thank you for coming on for our inaugural season of You Got Moxie. And so as part of that, the reflections we're really making here is about the how of change work. And so, in order for our audience here at home to get to know you a little better, for those who don't know you, but also in sort of thinking about this question of change work, can you share a pivotal moment in your career when you realized change needed to happen, and maybe sort of weave that into the story of your life or your career in a way?
I came in with a prepared thought, and I'm going to change it completely because something else just occurred. So it was the early 2000s. I was a few years into my job post-college as a strategy consultant. This was in the telecommunications industry. Strategy consulting is a really, really small industry with an outsized effect on the economy. It's where people with highfalutin degrees and limited life experience tell corporations what to do with their money. It's ridiculous. It still exists, but there it is. I did that. And,
Yes.
And I did it pretty well. And I was making a presentation literally, it was like comic, a corporate boardroom on a high floor in a Manhattan building. And my boss proudly tells the client that I'm a stand-up comedian. And I was separating my professional life and my comedy by night life by design. I was doing very political comedy. And the executives that we were talking to were some very Southern gentlemen who did not see the world the way that I did. And of course, instinctively, they said, "Oh, tell us a joke. What's your comedy about?" And I want to say, like, my comedy is about you, but I can't do that because I'm here for the job to pay off the loans for the education, which allowed me to get this ridiculous job. It's very circular. And I thought then, I can't keep doing this. I gotta get out of here. I gotta make a change. I think in the moment I bailed myself out by saying, you're actually paying me for my strategy consulting services. There's a separate bill for stand-up comedy. I can send you an invoice for that later, but until we get the purchase order set, I'm not gonna be able to deliver that particular service right now. And they were amused, and I kept my job, and I paid down the debt, but I also recognized a gap between how I was spending a lot of my time and what I was really feeling a passion to do more of. And so that initiated my exit. It took years. It wasn't like the next day I handed in my papers, but I initiated the steps to secure my freedom from that particular form of employment with gratitude and to pursue something in the more creative arts space, which is largely where I live today.
Amazing. And what I love about that too is the fact that it was a moment of you reconciling these different parts of yourself or your life.
Yeah.
That when put into sharp focus, it made you have that aha moment. And then it was like, okay, actually, my next step is clear. A lot of the time, and I'm thinking about our listeners too, and even myself, and I'm sure you felt this way, you look at the world in front of you, I would say, especially in these days, and it feels large, complex, overwhelming to a degree, right? We're all processing a lot of emotions these days on almost a daily basis. In many ways, you can get stuck. You can almost feel like inertia. Like, wait a minute, it's so much. What do I do? Where do I start? I want to be helpful. What does that even mean? And so, kind of reflecting on that feeling, how do you think about where to start with something when you're thinking about making change or having a conversation or influencing, and you have to do something? How do you think about starting?
I try not to have the whole world in my head at the time. That's very intimidating. It is the biggest speed bump ever to be like, society at large is broken. What do I do now? And that's why, we have Netflix to bail you out of situations like that. And you'd rather not, or the streaming platform of your choice. Mine is PBS Digital, but everyone has their own thing.
Yes, because of maybe your show, American
Maybe
Outdoors.
It's a self-interested comment.
On
Okay,
PBS?
fine. I see
maybe.
your hard-hitting journalism here.
Anytime,
Yes.
Everybody check that out on PBS.
Yes, check out America Outdoors or Hope in the Water. I have 2 programs on.
Oh my gosh, you have 2 now.
Yes.
Look at that.
You were talking to someone who has 2 television shows. That's crazy.
That's crazy.
That's just an amazing thing to be able to say.
Incredible. And kudos,
just for
by the
people
way.
listening, these are public television shows. So don't start imagining fanciful, constant red carpets and gold bidets and things like that in my life. It's a public TV house. I don't know why.
Everybody, when you make money, you clearly get gold bidets. Exactly.
Clearly, I am unpracticed at money because that's my imagination, right? That's like, I guess, what do super rich people? They must just like clean their butts with like a gold, bidet thing.
Bidet.
So I don't try to start with the world. I think I try to start with what I have access to in the moment, what I'm up to in the moment. So here's a recent example. I gave you like an ancient example that was almost 20 years ago. This is within the past several months. I've been learning about American history, the real kind, the kind that they want to ban, the teaching of because it's uncomfortable at times. And I've been learning things that I didn't know, which is super humbling because I think I know some things. And I'm like, I'll tell you about 1619 project, boom, boom, boom. But there was projects afoot, before then of democracy on this land from indigenous people who are already living here. And they actually advised, cajoled, our founders into founding. They basically pushed them into unity and toward this thing called democracy that was already here. And that's a huge reveal for me. And if it's huge for me, it's like way huge for a ton of other people who are still having trouble with like, we used to enslave people. So how I have thought about incorporating that change into the stories I'm telling is just like really small. It's like, okay, I'm not going to write a whole book. I'm not going to start a campaign called The True Founding Story brought to you. Like there's a lot of people who've been doing this, but I do have existing moments and existing outlets. So I started referencing it subtly in my newsletter. I started weaving it into my speaking events. I've started asking my friends, hey, did you know? And just gauging the reaction. Oh, I'd heard something about that. Oh, you mean the Iroquois? Well, really, they're the Haudenosaunee. And there's such a joy of that organic process of change. There are occasional times where I'm like, okay, we're going to build a spreadsheet. We're going to create a whole new machine. Most change starts with spreadsheets, people should understand. But the organic embrace of change, the weaving of change into the already present to make something else present and co-present within, I've been experimenting with that and kind of seeing what emerges rather than pushing, creating whole constructs from scratch so quickly. And I don't know. It's definitely not what I do all the time, but it's what I'm doing right now. And it feels better. It's almost like adapting to a temperature change. And you just kind of like, let's ease into this. Let's not go from like 100 degrees outside to 60-degree air conditioning inside, which I feel like people in Atlanta might do that sometimes.
Yeah, indeed. We do that, especially these days right now. Yes.
Not good for the body, not good for the immune system. So some change is best delivered in a smoother transition. And so with this radical story shift I can feel things changing in me. I'm like, I need to be steady with how I unveil this. Otherwise, I might get swallowed. I might get freaked out by the size. I might try to pull off too much too quickly and burn out, which I am also known to have done in my youth. And by youth, I mean, 6 months ago.
Well, by the way, I still think you're very youthful. So let's just say that.
Thank you.
And I think it's so interesting you talk about, because when you learn different things, like when you're today's years old and you learn something, right? Yes. And it changes the weather in your brain, which is one of my favorite expressions, which was, it's loosely extracted from the New York Times. It was the New York Times, New York Magazine book review of Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, where they talked about that book changing the weather in their brain. It's one of my favorite expressions because I actually think it's what we do as storytellers. It's actually our job, which is we create the conditions for different weather patterns to exist in the minds of the people we are relating with our texts and with our stories. And actually the act is of an individual going through that process themselves and letting the weather shift and pattern. But that doesn't happen overnight, and nor should it, for exactly the reasons that you outlined. It's sort of this idea that we as humans behave in many ways like the physical world we come from, the metaphysical world we come from. And so the physics that apply within the world we live in apply to us at the same time, which is exactly what you're talking about with the temperature change, like from going from outside to inside, right? It's a shock to the body. And so we actually have to think about the ways in which we relate to each other and the ways we tell stories in a similar mechanism, because that's actually how we function. And it makes sense that we do.
Yeah, we are, America Outdoors, the show I jokingly, underhandedly promoted a few minutes ago. I was in conversation with this man, Dudley Edmondson, who I think of often because he said something that still resonates, that we are a part of nature, not apart from nature. And that is a repeat lesson that's emerging in my current indigenous studies and sitting with various elders. It's like this, it's a refrain. It's really, we've done a lot of work to separate ourselves from that. And so being attuned to our own natures and change, one is a constant, right? Which is an ironic kind of grammatical statement, semantics. Change is a constant. And the only constant is change. There's, Octavia Butler in there indirectly. Then we also, we change at sort of a natural pace that we often try to break and try to overly accelerate sometimes.
That's exactly right. Oh, may truer words be spoken. And I think part of that actually leads to another area of this discussion really organically, which is you think of laws of physics, right? And you think about when you hit an obstacle, right? Or something comes in the path. And so there is a natural point of resistance, right? Or there are points of inflection that happen when different elements, right, start to enter a pathway. And so I always say we also behave like Newton's laws of motion, which is a whole other conversation. And so one of the aspects of that is we often will meet these moments of resistance, conflict, failure, as we might call it. And I always say there's only failure if you don't learn. But question for you is, in your journey, and maybe thinking about a specific example in which you were working to change something, reframe something, think about something differently, and you were met with resistance or with full on, like, hit a wall, right? What did you do? How did you think about that moment of conflict or resistance? And, for our listeners at home who may be feeling that in something they're trying or even in their own community, what are some tips or ideas that you have in ways to think about meeting that point of resistance or conflict?
So another job story comes to mind. Maybe 7-ish years after that last story, or 5-ish years, I had moved to New York. I was working for The Onion. I was in charge of all things digital there. And I was super excited because I had just escaped from strategy consulting. And this is like a dream. And I get to bring my nerdiness, my technology, my politics, my comedy into one bucket and just ready to like launch 1,000 initiatives. And I was met with resistance by those who were there before me. And I thought I had a plan to counteract that to some degree. In my first 100 days, I like took people out to lunch one at a time, just to like my own little listening tour, and to try to get a feel. But I had underestimated the what I had walked into, the conditions that I was joining, right? I was excited to make all this new stuff, and I hadn't really absorbed the stuff that was there and the vibe that was there, the culture that was there. And I took it a little personally. I'm like, oh, they hired me to do this job and not let me do this job. Like, you don't want to be a part of the future, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying this out loud, but I'm screaming it inside. And so my approach, one was like a lot of meetings, just like a lot of meetings. I had help from some of the veterans there who just took me further in to observe and kind of study. And I read more of the back catalog. I sat in on more creative meetings, not pitching anything, just absorbing. And then I started doing these internal like education sessions where I was just explaining how stuff worked. I wasn't asking for anything. I was actually offering something. And I was like, this is how Twitter works, for example. This is how, Facebook works, for example. This is what Google Maps, just kind of working through these platforms. But when you're doing that with creative people, creative comedy people, they can't help. They can't resist. They actually can't resist.
It's true.
And I remember this particular moment where I was showing Twitter to a room of the writers, and the head writer at the time, Joe Randazzo, I was explaining a retweet. And back in the day, there was no button for it. You just manually did it. So you copied and pasted the existing tweet, and then you manually inserted your text before. And that's like a faith-based system, right? You're trusting the underlying tweet that's been referenced. And Joe, saw this post from a breaking news account, and he copied and pasted it. He typed some new stuff, and then he changed the underlying tweet. And he's like, what if I did this? And I was like, you can't do that. That's lying. But it was in service of satire and what The Onion does in the world, which is like poke at media through its form. It was perfect. And it wasn't my idea, right? It wasn't on my list of initiatives that I walked in the door with. It wasn't in my slideshow, and I did have slideshows. He got it. And I learned 1,000 things in that. The creativity, the innovation that I was hired to bring, it was more about revealing it and like setting the stage for it to emerge really organically and with the buy-in, because this was Joe with his credibility, with his history. Then the other folks could see, and I'm collapsing the story. Some of this happened over like days and weeks, but the lesson happened in a moment. And the resistance evaporated because this other party that was like party to the collective of resistance was invested and was behaving from a position they had already changed. And I was like, well, look at that. That's pretty cool. Let's do it for democracy now, right? Like, can we? That was like, it was literally like, fun and games at the Onion. Can we, when the stakes are even more intense, can that be a part of the approach? And can you acknowledge the conditions that you're walking into? And can you show people, what might be different, and then listen for their spark when they grab onto and have an aha moment, and then build on that. And then from that moment, we had a demonstration, and we could try some other things, and we got more aggressive. And it wasn't me pushing an organization. It was me guiding. It was me setting some rails. It was me prompting and seeing what came back in. It forced me to release the idea that I had to have all the ideas. And that was very humbling. That was very humbling. Because I was like, but you hired me for my brain and my ideas and my creativity. It's like, well, we're already a creative organization. So how do you play in and boost that creativity, help it adapt, focus it, move it? But I didn't need to make that place creative. I just needed to unlock and redirect to some degree what was already there.
So real. That just resonated in my soul, because it is so real. Because what you realize about creativity, right, is that if there is trust, and which allows for the freedom of expression within a creative group, the sum is better than its parts. And there is nothing that has creatively resonated that was done by a singular person. Yeah. There is always a group of people behind anything in life, but any creative endeavor. And I think it's a really profound note that you just said, which was that I didn't have to have all the answers. And that for me was actually a revelatory moment personally in my own journey, even as a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, when I woke up one morning about 10 years ago, give or take, and I went, oh, I'm just part of a continuum.
Yes.
I'm just part of a continuum. And when you start to realize that you're part of something that's so much larger, and I imagine this is coming up in your conversations with elders as well, is that because it connects to the natural world. And so what you start to realize is that you're just one component of a much larger equation. And the goal then becomes a listening exercise to then collaborate from there. And so I just really reflected back on that piece about listening and self-realization within that process. So real. Yeah.
There's this concept of 7 generations, within a lot of indigenous communities and cultures, and that you plan for and operate in the interest of the 7 generations from now. And you are also, in the line of 7 generations prior. And so we're really a chain. And, we're links in a chain. We're not alone. We're tied to each other. And so listening, facilitating, stewarding is a part of our responsibility. It's to the chain, not just to our one link.
That's exactly right. Later this season, we're going to have Vanessa Roanhorse on, who's an incredible leader in the economic justice space within Native and Indigenous communities, and more broadly, particularly for Native and Indigenous women. And so I encourage our listeners to keep joining us for that conversation later on this season, which should hopefully really connect to some of the ideas that we've started here. And with that, I know we're running close on time. So one last question, Baratunde, which is, in this time of a lot of turmoil and emotions, as we've talked about, a lot of change at once, I wonder for you, how do you think about your own rejuvenation, filling your cup, how you keep going? Where does that come from for you?
I'd have to give a lot of credit to genetics. I think I am wired, assembled, programmed with a certain predisposition. I play younger than I am. And I also don't have kids, so I haven't been aged by the youth. I'm humble in the face of history and recognize that our species has been through a lot. But whatever communities we're part of, they've all been through a lot. For us to be here, a bunch of folks had to go through a lot for us to be breathing right now. So I serve at the pleasure of the chain in trying to continue that. And I'm humble with the idea of like how much is on me to do. And try to avoid also on the other side of that, the despair that can lead to total inaction and opting out. I joke about tuning into streaming to escape. That's useful in a temporary fashion, but it's really destructive if we sustain that attitude of just walking away from the challenge and the difficulty and the discomfort. Keeping going is not always easy. And I think anyone who is honest is exhausted and is doubtful and wonders like, are all the wheels falling off? Am I in the moment? Like you read about some stuff in history and then you look around your present and you're like, I think I'm in a chapter in my history book. This is
right. Yes.
This is it. And we keep inhaling. We keep exhaling. We take another step. We walk another mile. We get up another day. Sometimes reluctantly. I don't want to get up today. It's bad out there. The world is all jacked up. I just want to stay in bed. And we ultimately get up. And if there is a piece that really keeps me going, it's like, okay, there's people who I know, who I love, who love me. We create this little piece of our world together. And the whole world is just that times a billion. It's groups of people making the world every day, choosing to get up, choosing to take a step, choosing to inhale and exhale, and doing it in a sense of community, mutual belonging to each other, wishing the best for each other. And that if we stop doing that, then we're guaranteeing that it really is the end.
That's right.
But if we keep doing that, then we're preserving the possibility that it's also a new beginning.
That's exactly right. And as we would say in Spanish, it's paso a paso, which is step by step.
Paso a paso.
Paso a paso.
Me gusta.
Which coincidentally was the name of my Spanish textbook in middle and high school. And I actually think is a really beautiful reflection of how we learn and how we live, which is your reflection, which is day by day, step by step, breath by breath. And then how do we reflect back the love, hopefully, that we seek in our individual lives and we give in our individual lives to each other, which theoretically should have a ripple effect in mass. And
it's not theoretically. It's not theoretically. So everything is connected to everything. The quantum physicists will tell you this. The elevated spiritual people will tell you this. And everything in between. There is no separation between me and you. And all the stuff that we don't like in the world, it is not as simple. I think part of the challenge is you get your wisdom from Instagram and it can go off the rails real fast because people want to be like, well, I have good things because I really wanted good things and I manifested goodness in my life. Implying that if you don't have good things, you just haven't like prayed hard enough for it, wished hard enough for it. So that's an extreme overinterpretation of an essentially true principle that we do make our world, that the things that we don't like about our world emerge from somewhere, something that we have collectively been a part of. And if we change that like collective foundation, that collective soil, new things can grow. And the way you do that, you could try like a mass cultural revolution like Mao did. It's got a crazy ton of collateral damage to do it that way. It's like, I wouldn't recommend it. But we change the culture, we change the outcomes of society. And that step by step, that paso a paso, that every day, that hand to hand, that being linked in the chain together, that is a way to do it. And so it is not hypothetically that we, kind of shift things with how we show up with each other. It is exclusively how it happens. Even the people who seem to have all the power, who are making radical changes, there's groups of them getting together, paso a paso, passing a bill, changing a court ruling, deploying capital, right?
That's right.
It's still not just like one person with mega powers pulling all the strings. There's groups of people pulling strings together.
That's correct.
So we have an opportunity to be groups of people ourselves, actually,
That's right.
Not just hypothetically. Thank you.
Thank
you for having me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. And one might say that it's about using our collective moxie, which is exactly why I named the company that and why this podcast is called You Got Moxie.
I should have seen that.
It's right there, it wrote itself.
Right there.
But it's absolutely right. And we're so grateful, Baratunde, that you are a part of our community here and the greater community, because it's exactly right. It's day by day and step by step linked together. So thank you for being with us today and sharing your moxie with us too.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations on your inaugural season.
If you want to learn more about Baratunde, you can check out his new video podcast coming out this October of 2024, Life with Machines, all about how we want to live in this AI moment. lifewithmachines.media. Continue to follow us and listen to your favorite episodes at collectivemoxie.com. That's collectivemoxie.com. We're excited to see you next time. Take care.